In April 1999, I set out to photograph village schools in Rajasthan. Some months before, I had happened to witness a girl being beaten by her teacher in a small government school some hours from Jodhpur and had been dwelling upon it. When I came back to Delhi, I proposed an essay to the political weekly where I worked at the time about what it was like being a girl in a village school. I was told the story lacked a suitable news peg or one that readers of the magazine might relate to, and my idea was set aside. I decided to take a month-long sabbatical from work and to spend it in rural Rajasthan. I started by traveling randomly from school to school, crisscrossing the state through Jaipur, Jodhpur, Osiyan, Bikaner, Bardmer, Falodi, Bara, and Churu districts, photographing mainly in the villages, from government schools to experimental schools to NGO organized community events. I met students, teachers, officials, and activists. They were surprisingly tolerant of my ignorance, endeavoring to answer my many questions as an English speaking person from Delhi. In Lunkaransar town, I visited a Marushala or experimental school run by Urmul Setu Sansthan, one of the oldest NGOs in Rajasthan, to try and educate nomadic Jogi children whose ancestry, some say, connects them to the Romas of Europe. I met Urma and Halima, who took me home with them, and I was introduced to the family of Bhananachi, father of Urma and respected community leader. He has been my friend and sage guide these many long years since then, until he passed away at the end of 2019. I will miss him greatly. We sat in their mud home on the bed with the snakes and chameleons and rooster underneath it, with Urma's brothers and their hunting dogs around us, and Bhananaji invited me to travel with them. In Barmer district, lost, I came upon a group of women fully covered in large, dark ajrak shawls standing around the corpse of a little girl. They looked intimidating, but when I ventured to ask for directions to the village school, I was interrupted by one who grasped me by my hands and told me all that was wrong with her life. With great conviction, Ismat impressed upon me that on my return to Delhi, I should tell people of the troubles of those in Barmer. Her older daughter Jannat was terrified of me in my jeans and short hair with my camera. She thought I must be a boy. But Ismat took my address and in subsequent letters that she dictated to literate acquaintances and posted to me, urged me to return. I did. Looking out at schools opened out a world. I realized that school was only the microcosm of a complex reality that I knew nothing about, having grown up mainly in the cities. My own grandfathers both left their villages to join the army, and slowly our ties with the rural were severed. Like Alice, I went down the rabbit hole. Over the past 2 decades, my visits to Western Rajasthan to meet with essentially the same people and places have encompassed various parts of life and changes that have occurred over time. I have witnessed the seasons, drought years, and the year of a great monsoon when Barmer became Kashmir, dust storms that can give you a fever, and a flood that wreaked enough havoc to require the rebuilding of Urma's home. I have followed the farming cycle, migration, men traveling to work as labor in Gujarat and Maharashtra, food for work programs, Manrega and other government schemes, nomadic journeys, illness, epidemics, cerebral malaria, tuberculosis, overwhelmed hospitals and understaffed schools, death from snakebite, from accidents, from being burnt alive for providing inadequate dowry, from growing old, the death of a camel in a year that is remembered as the year of the death of the camel, births, marriages, child marriages, money lenders, civil society interventions, dharnas, rallies, national and panchayat elections, festivals, feuds passed down over generations, celebrations, prayers, and through it all my friends, by whom I was led. This large archive of more than 40,000 negatives now encompasses various narratives and stories within it, as well as different forms of image making, from pose studio pictures to cinema verite style images. I hope to eventually make a series of books, each one a note from the desert. Made between 1999 and 2007, Jannat is based upon the life of Jannat, her younger sister Hura, and mother Ismat. After Jannat and Hura's father abandoned them, the small and imperiled family of three living in a remote hamlet near Barmer were fused together as one symbiotic being. I spent days and weeks with them in the course of years. In the form that I have struggled to create, as much as it's a story about growing up in a village, one I wish to tell for city-dwelling children like my niece, it's also a story about love. Jannat died of illness in 2007 at the age of 23, although as with many in the village, her exact birth date is uncertain. Hura is now attending college as well as studying computers, practically unheard of in her peer group of local young Muslim women. When Ismat was in the court struggling to gain access to her own land from her ex-husband, the judge would not believe that she had once been the poorest person in her village. These photographs were used as evidence. The series Ruined Rainbow was created from rolls of film taken by children in the same village as Jannat and Hura. After I had been visiting for some years, several of the children, who were always avid followers of where I was going and what I was doing, and in a sense my first collaborators, decided they too would like to take pictures. I asked if they were serious, and as they insisted they were, I brought them some Kodak cameras. These now belong to them. They could decide, for instance, whether they wish to photograph in color or in black and white. In the initial years, the children would photograph and give me the rolls to develop and print in the lab in Barmer or Delhi and to bring back to them. They were excited and enthusiastic and photographed widely. In the process of learning, they also made mistakes. On one occasion, they were horrified to see flashes of light streaked across the prints I brought them. The unknown photographer had accidentally opened the back of the camera and exposed the film to light. No one would claim the film as theirs, and it was instantly discarded as failed. I kept it in my bag. Years later, in 2010, when I was editing my own contact sheets for the exhibition Notes from the Desert, I found these rolls. I looked at them anew and was moved to see long familiar faces and places appear in the photographs. I wondered which particular child had made the images and at the precise exchange that might have occurred at that moment. I thought about photography and its inherent subjectivity, how there are as many possible narratives as individuals. As with life, the medium of technology introduces its own presence through chance and accidents. I played with the prints, and when I looked at them again, the exposed images had formed an unexpected rainbow, a ruined rainbow, if you will. Visiting Rajasthan so frequently, I formed close relationships with local activists. Although I saw myself as an independent artist, having studied painting and documentary and fine art photography, and later funding my own work through journalism in my 20s and teaching in my 30s, I would sometimes live at local NGOs, and spontaneous ideas arise from our mutual conversations. In early 2003, the NGO Urmul Setu Sansthan organized a Balika Mela, or Fair for Girls, in Loonkaranser town, attended by almost 1,500 adolescent girls from 70 neighboring villages. The Mela had various stalls, food, performances, a Ferris wheel, magicians, puppet shows, games, competitions, similar to any other small town fair. Urmul Setu invited me to do something with photography. I created a photo stall for anyone to come in and have their portrait taken, and later buy the silver gelatine print at a subsidized rate if they wished. I had a few basic props and backdrops, whatever we could get from the local town studio and cloth shop on a very limited budget, but it was fairly minimal. And since it can get windy out in the desert, everything would keep getting blown around or periodically struck down. The light was the broad, even light of an open sky filtered through the cloth roof of our tent. Many of the more striking props, like the peacock and the paper hats, were brought in by the girls themselves. Girls came in and decided how and with whom they would like to be photographed. Best friends, new friends, sisters, the odd younger brother who had tagged along, girls with their teachers, the whole class, the local Girl Scouts. 13 of those who posed for the pictures went on to learn photography in the workshops that I began there with Urmul Setu that summer, and 2 years later they photographed the fair themselves. One of them, Manju Saran, ran Shiva Photo Studio in village Kalu for 5 years before her marriage, a rare occurrence in deeply patriarchal Rajasthan. The second essay in the book Balika Mela is written by her. In 2005, I met a great Dai or midwife, Kasumbi Dai, at a birthing workshop organized by NGO friends. She invited me to photograph her work, to be there when she delivered her grandchild in the remote village of Motasar in Gaffan. I lived with her for 10 days before the baby came, and I ended up assisting with the birth. A great feminist, someone who became a midwife after she lost her husband at a young age, Kasumbi Dai had delivered all the children in the surrounding areas for miles. I see her as the mother of mothers. The set of pictures became the birth series. Isma took me to visit her father's grave and those of other family members. Created from materials found in nature, I was struck by how lightly the graves exist upon the earth's surface, and in time I began to photograph the graveyards. Traces memorializes both marked and unmarked graves. They belong to people with relatively few economic resources and from both the Muslim and Hindu communities, including Bishnois, Jats, and Meghwals, pointing to a more heterogeneous complexity of the local population and contradicting the conservative formulations of nationalist politics in India today. Using stones, shards of pottery, hand-inscribed gravestones, or personal items such as fabric or medicine bottles, each site is marked with the available materials to pay homage and cultivate memory. Slowly, these are reabsorbed by the landscape as they are imbibed by other creatures of the earth, or erased by sand and the elements to become one with the emptiness and silence of the desert. Through all of this time, I continued to photograph in schools. The mark on the wall, its title drawn from a short story by Virginia Woolf in which a woman in a rocking chair gets obsessed with a mark on the wall, documents drawings made by local artists, children, and teachers in government schools in Rajasthan under the now lapsed Leher Kaksha scheme. This was initiated by the state to help children learn visually from the walls in their classrooms. In the starkest of villages, in bare concrete schools, using the most meager resources, I found rich, imaginative traces of the human hand. From the most tentative marks to those more sophisticated, from depictions of determined children making their way to school to individualistic expressions of nature, from maps of the village to symbols of the state, these fragments offered glimpses of the collective mind of local communities. In early 2013, I was invited by an NGO organizing a festival of the arts in Maharashtra to live in the home of a Warli indigenous artist, Rajesh Vangad, who was also participating in the festival. I was to create a photo studio followed by an exhibition in the local primary school. It was loosely based on Balika Mela. In the course of my time living and working on the school project in Ganjar, I began to appreciate the landscape. Only some hours away from Bombay, it was nonetheless completely distinct. We were living within nature, which, chameleon-like, had so many faces, changing even as one took a turn. There was no electricity for hours and nights altogether, and my Airtel phone only worked when I climbed a little hill. Undistracted, my awareness was sharpened. I wished to try and record the landscape, but my images felt distant, even opaque. Perhaps the beauty obscured the reality of the place, or perhaps I simply did not know it well enough. In conversations with Rajesh ji, whose family has lived for generations in Vangadpada, working as artists, we began to discuss his village. Any place looks entirely different to different eyes. I was made acutely aware, once again, of how a place is assigned meaning only by its viewer, including perhaps by her relative distance or proximity to it, and of how viewing itself is an essentially solitary act, since what we see might be only a projection of what we already know or have experienced prior. As someone wise once said, to the Brahmin's eye, the pond is full of beautiful lotuses to admire. To the tribal fisherwoman, it appears as the host of fish and living creatures, the very source of sustenance. Tentatively, I decided to photograph places significant to Rajeshji, often with him present in the frame. He would take me to these special places, and I would decide where and how to construct the image, what to include, how to work with or against the light, how best to place him within the landscape, and so on. It was a set of pictures about his place, a map determined by Rajeshji and formally constructed by me, photographer as cartographer. When I later saw my contact sheets, I realized that so much of the narrative that I had received from Rajeshji, the great stories which had made it come alive for me, was missing. Part of it, I realized, was the limitation and perhaps the unique value of photography, which restricts what is in the image to the present moment but also erases all that came before. How could I convey what happened in those months in the 70s when the violent mobs of a powerful political party raided the village and the locals fled and fell upon each other in terror? Or the particular full moon night in October when a great forest on one hill comes alive and all the people who spend that night in the forest see shining eyes glitter around them, as even the most dangerous animals are known to be benign when everything glows from the special aura of the moon? Or the stories of big overlords who come calling in secret to the homes of innocent, hospitable men, bringing gifts and drink and returning with deeds of land? Or the mythical stories that encompass everything that has come or is yet to come? I had an idea. We decided to push our collaboration to be more explicit. Rajesh would inscribe his drawing over my photograph, meet my photographic text with his drawings. As Warli art is monochromatic, and in order to make the encounter intense and precise, we decided to restrict our work to an uncolored palette. Initially autobiographical, the work has grown to become more abstract and to encompass larger themes. This commingling work may be seen as an encounter between two artists of about the same age, using entirely different languages, one with ancient antecedents, the other more recently originated, and the histories, politics, and worldviews embedded within the expressions of those forms. Rajeshji's language, constructed with stick and brush, unfolds entirely from an encyclopedia of forms in his mind, which emerge to reflect the world, memory, and myth. Wind, disease, apocalypse, anything is summoned forth at will. In my own language, constructed by camera and negative, the world itself is the encyclopedia, and I recognize and edit existing structures to reflect what arises in my mind. The final work contains parallel projections of place using perspective, negative, and positive space, tonal values, and relative dimensions. It merges fields of sight and of perception. If you stand here, you might see it this way. If you move just a little, another world unfolds. Or as someone put it to me, it's as though you were photographing an old home and the resident of the house came out and began to speak. In the Hanu, spending time in Rajeshji's village, I learnt of the Bahora procession, held once a year in many Adivasi villages, in which the entire community participates in a ritual performance over several nights in order to enact a mythological tale. Acts of Appearance assumed its form within a village of papier-mâché artists from the Kokna and Warli tribes in Johar district, further inland from the Hanu. The performers for the Bohora are chosen from among the residents and wear elaborate masks made by artists to represent different gods, demons, and ancillary figures. These masks take weeks to make, are sacred and consecrated, and constitute a moral and imaginative universe, but must also conform to strict rules of creation as they represent powerful archetypes refined over generations of storytelling. Spending time in the area, I began to wonder about the gap between these idealized mythic masks and the reality I saw around me. In 2014, I sought out the acclaimed brothers Subhash and Bhagwan Dharma Kadu, sons of the legendary artist Dharma Kadu, with a proposal. I wished to commission them, along with their families and fellow volunteers, more than 30 people in total, to create a new set of masks, not of gods or demons as per local tradition, but rather as representing beings existing in contemporary reality. The interpretive creations were to come from them, with the suggestion that they embody familiar or known individuals of different ages, the varied rasas or emotions like love, sadness, fear, or anger, and those experiences common to all humans, such as sickness, relationships, or aging. In the course of dialogue, animals were naturally understood to be a part of this universe. Later, precious objects entered the frame as they are believed to have sentience too. Inhabiting these masks, a cast of actor volunteers, including some of the artists, would later improvise and enact different real, in quotation marks, scenarios across dreaming and waking states in and around the village. I imagine using the freedom afforded by the masks as a way to create distance from and reflect upon the self, as a possible means to explore one's life and circumstances in the lived present rather than the distant past. We are all heterogeneous beings, constituted of as many different selves as moments in time, inhabiting varying contexts, and others read us in their own subjective ways, often different from how we imagine ourselves to be. The question also arises, to whom does my face belong, me or the world that views me? Although these enactments were mediated by the camera and me behind it, the viewer is denied access to the physical likenesses of the subjects, to be replaced instead by their art. In a sense, my own endeavor has involved learning to listen more deeply and to see more clearly and collectively. While photography is a democratic medium in some respects, as almost everyone today has access to some form of camera, there is disproportionate power in terms of who gets to tell the story. My own small attempt has been to try and cede control of representation and individualization. When we focus only on the explicit object, which itself is constantly changing, we fail to pay heed to all of the process and players embedded in it. Even in attempting to deconstruct the process, we end up creating new centers of focus. In truth, there is a multitude behind any single act, or any solidified convergence of acts that appear in the form of an object. And there is an ever-flowing continuum which follows naturally from what came before. Finally, as much as the work engages with conditions that are unjust in the world, I have wished to privilege all the ingenious ways people find to swim or to stay afloat despite fragile or precarious circumstances. These small acts of resistance and beauty by individuals or communities are all we have in the end, and wherein lies hope.